Way up north, there's a huge, cold land called Canada. It's dotted with zillions of lakes and forests that seem to stretch forever into the distance. Now, Canada seems nice and peaceful today, but going way back, it was wild frontier land fought over by early explorers, traders, settlers, and lots of tribes already living there for thousands of years, like the Inuit, Iroquois, Micmac, and more. These First Nations, as they're respectfully called now, carved out survival amid harsh winters and rocky terrain for ages. Then one day around 1000 AD, rowdy bearded guys with funny helmets showed up on ships, the Viking visitors from Iceland. After stumbling onto today's Newfoundland, the Vikings partied for a bit and even snatched a native woman. But soon these nuisances vanished and the tribes were left scratching their heads for 500 more years about their brief encounter. The next rowdy visitors came in 1497 with Italian John Cabot, who planted a flag claiming Canada for England. More ships kept coming though, this time loaded with French explorers and fishers. Later, both England and France hatched money-making schemes to build little trading towns and forts by dealing animal furs that European bigwigs just loved wearing. But there was just one problem: the tribes like the Huron and Iroquois already lived and hunted on these lands for eons. Cue the drama. What unfolded was a whole lot of clashing for territory and furs that ravaged tribes with new European diseases. While explorers Jacques Cartier gave Canada its name and Samuel de Champlain built great fur trade posts, tribal alliances kept shifting and the brutal beaver wars. This epic struggle saw the ferocious Iroquois, armed by Dutch and English, battle French settlers and other tribes for decades until everyone was exhausted by the 1680s. While Europeans grabbed land and grew rich, thousands of native peoples tragically perished by guns or sickness introduced by these uninvited guests. For the next century, France happily dominated central parts of Canada they called New France thanks to fur trade connections along the St. Lawrence River. Britain instead focused on the eastern Atlantic colonies and the Hudson Bay's tempting northern resources. But soon tensions erupted into all-out war between England and France, fought partly in North America from 1754 to 1763. The upstart British eventually seized France's Canadian lands for king and country, but still had to keep French colonists happy. Next door, Britain's own American colonists didn't feel so happy with all the taxes and rules from London though. Soon they started rebelling, stirring a right ruckus. When American patriots invaded Canada, hoping their northern mates would join the fight in 1775, the attack failed because most Canadians actually stayed loyal to Britain. Why? Well, partly because the largely French Canadians distrusted the newly declared USA dominated by English Protestants. Business also boomed, selling supplies to wealthy British forces, so Canada rebuffed American advances to shake off the crown. After America won independence, thousands of disgruntled British loyalists said good riddance to the former colonies and sailed north to settle swaths of Canada instead. But these grumpy newcomers and traditional French communities didn't mix smoothly. To keep disputes settled, Britain divided Canada into upper and lower areas in 1791 so the major groups had some space. Still, Canadians eventually demanded more control in how they were governed instead of everything decided back in Britain. A few scrappy rebellions flared up in 1837 led by William Lyon Mackenzie and Louis Joseph calling for reform, but when protesters battled British soldiers, the uprising ended swiftly. Though the leaders fled with their tails between their legs into American exile, their demands did bring change. Because Britain was forced to unite Upper and Lower Canada again under more responsible government addressing colonist concerns, it marked progress towards Canada one day running its own affairs. Soon, railroads crossed this huge land, and word of gold strikes out west meant over 100,000 eager prospectors and settlers kept expanding frontiers deeper into territories loosely claimed. With security threats from America fading over time and wealth pouring in from resources like timber, minerals, and wheat exports, talks grew on uniting Britain's scattered northern colonies into one federation. The clincher came amidst fears of being gobbled up by expansionist Americans if remaining fragmented during the 1860s Civil War erupting below the borders. So local leaders from Atlantic to Pacific finally united to form the Dominion of Canada on July 1, 1867, swearing allegiance to the British Queen. Now citizens could elect their own parliament and prime minister to tend to local matters like building the railroad across prairies, governing the diverse growing population, and managing relations with First Nations bands. Of course, Canada was still basically under Britain for decades more before gaining full independence eventually. There were more disputes with Americans too, like arguments over seal hunting, trade policies, and even which country could claim part of far northern lands both thought was theirs. But aside from more bickering over who controlled borderlands or related to the occasional pig wandering over from Vermont, things stayed relatively peaceful with the USA over the next century, if not a bit noisy from the constant pop music and Hollywood movies drifting north. Gradually, Canada grew into an independent, industrialized middle power and key ally, though some grumbled politicians in Ottawa often just went along meekly with decisions from mighty Washington rather than ruffle feathers. Domestically, conflicts fled periodically over what should define this geographically vast, culturally split dominion. Beyond rolling wheat plains dotting the horizon and snow-capped Rockies looming as backdrops, Canada struggled balancing regional differences between mostly francophone Quebec and the majority English descendants of British roots. Keeping French Canadians happy amidst concerns over Americanization and losing identity has challenged unity since rebellions first erupted to debates over special Quebec autonomy right through unity votes on potential separation by slim margins averted in nail-biting referendums. It's often been a tricky juggling act preserving harmony in this land of many peoples and tongues. Yet the perseverance ensuring minority rights highlights strengths that distinguish Canada, internationally embracing diversity as moral value and policy more fully than other Western nations. Historically, opening doors to Asian immigrants once barred and today welcoming over 300,000 newcomers from across the globe yearly keeps reforming the social fabric into a uniquely inclusive cultural mosaic. Beyond linchpins of universal healthcare, good governance, stability, and high living standards, surveys reveal citizens prioritizing openness and trust far more than other societies. Sure, American cultural and economic heft profoundly shapes life for Canadians given 10 times the population next door, and reliance on its trade and investment introduces uncertainty if political rifts erupt. Not to mention some Canadians tire over constant comparisons to their famously rambunctious neighbours down south on everything from violence to elections drama. Yet close ties binding North America's frontier states suggest less conflict than cooperation enduring between the two nations, sharing history and geography into a global future where Western freedoms must champion dignity for all striving for better lives. And it's here Canada's legacy championing compromise despite differences offers exemplary lessons for America and beyond during divided times. Because the messy story of Canada blooming against harsh odds proves societies exceed when voices exclude none, where human rights and pluralism defeat notions us versus them. Canada's improbable trail from disputed colonies to mature middle power hints that empathy and moral conscience can redeem democracy's floundering to live up to high ideals of justice if citizens stay engaged. And who knows, perhaps the road ahead is made less bitter by a sprinkling of good humour alongside fair play virtues Canada's first peoples and founding misfits alike carved into this landscape, now guarding the world's longest friendly border from sea to sea to sea.